I'm Amy Morgan, the feature writer for the Marriage Initiative, and I am just delighted to introduce Lucille Williams to you today. You are going to love Lucille. In addition to being a pastor's wife, women's ministry leader, and Prepare and Rich facilitator, Lucille speaks and writes about marriage with refreshing candor and humor. She's written From Me to We, a premarital guide for the bride and groom to be, and The Intimacy You Crave, straight talk about sex and pancakes. Her interview on Focus on the Family was named one of the best in 2018. Lucille, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Amy. It's a pleasure. Thank you.
Oh, well, we are just delighted to talk to you. You have quite an interesting story, and I've had the pleasure to have to hear you tell it. But you got married when you were very young, just barely 19, right? How did that go?
Oh, man. When you look back, you think, wow, the odds were really against us. To get married at 19, we didn't really know anything about marriage. We were young. We didn't know the Lord at that time. So we set out and we just said, okay, we're just going to do the best we can. And we jumped in.
Well, and you had an interesting start too. You've told the story. It's in your first chapter of From Me to We, which you can see what I've done with this great resource. I always love to write takeaways, but you had a really interesting first experience.
Yes, we did. We did. When you get married young, the idea of taking a cruise, you think that's what you got to do, right? You have all the week of all the food that you want to eat, and they plan everything out for you. So my husband and I went, and we ended up in Florida, and I had family there. So we decided we were going to do like a layover in Florida, and we were getting off the ship the next day. So we packed all of our stuff away. I said, we'll just wear what we're wearing tonight, and then we'll put that back on so we don't have to have all the luggage. So we got rid of all our stuff except for what we were wearing, so it'd be less to carry. And that night we were out with some couples just having a really good time. We're at this table. It was kind of an oval shape, and my husband and I were in the middle. And all of a sudden, he didn't look so good, and he put his head back and he started vomiting, like projectile all over me, all over him, because we're honeymooning, so we're like all snuggled up next to each other, and he's just but I mean, it was awful. It was the most horrible, horrific thing, and it just kept coming like a volcano. And then finally it stopped, and we just kind of sat there and looked around the table. No one said a word. Nobody laughed, nothing. It was just quiet. And I think my husband or one of us said, well, we need to get out. And so they moved, and we scooted out, and we went back up to our room. And here we've got vomit all over the clothes we have to wear the next day. And so I've got a sick husband. I'm like, oh no, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? So I found some soap to wash our clothes in the little sink in the little tiny bathroom that you had on the ship. And I'm standing there over this sink, and I'm washing our clothes. And as young and naive as I was, I distinctly remember looking down at the vomit on the clothes and thinking to myself, this is marriage.
Yeah.
This is marriage. He vomited. It got on me. It got on him. I think it got a little bit on the people next to us too. And I was like, wow, like I'm in this. It's not all, candy and sugar plums and rainbows. This is serious stuff. And I'll just never forget that. And I was right. I mean, marriage is serious business.
I just love that. How, as funny as that story is 41 years later, it does really, you use it as such an analogy of that was the reality that, marriage has realities to it. And when somebody vomits, it gets on the other one. And, no matter if it's literal or actual. But I just really thought that was such a great way to start your book. That was just really neat. So you said, as we talk about the vomit, how your marriage started off, but it changed. How did it change? What changed for you?
Well, in the beginning, neither one of us knew the Lord. And I came from a big Italian family, so I was really good at fighting. I mean, the Italians, I guess I can't speak for all Italians, but my Italian family, there was always a lot of volume. And if you had something to say or you disagreed, we would, fight it out. And So my husband and I did a lot of fighting. There was a lot of tension, a lot of anxiety, a lot of stress. Like I remember thinking, oh man, like what in the world is going on? Like it was just, when you're in a bad marriage, life is really difficult. But then about 5 years in, he and I both found the Lord, and we both accepted Jesus within a day of each other, believe it or not. Didn't know it, didn't know the other person did it till later. And it was 2 weeks later till we told each other. But once Jesus came into the picture, then I was like, okay, I need to look at my marriage differently, because there's a lot of verses about women in the Bible and marriage, and I just remember as a young Christian married gal, I would look in things in the Bible and I would see something and I would get mad. So I'm like, oh no, this is in here. I have to do this now. And like the whole concept of yielding and submitting and looking out for him and not just me. I'm like, are you kidding me? Like, I've been fighting all these years. I'm not giving up the ground that I already got. And so I would have these little fights with the Lord and go, no, I'm not doing this. I'm not doing that one. I'm not doing that one. I'm not doing. And then I realized, okay, yeah, it says it. And so God knows he's the master. He created us. He created marriage. He created this whole union thing. So if he says this is what is going to make your marriage better, I'm like, I need to do what the Lord says. And so that's why I would get mad, because I knew once it was there and I saw it, then I had to do it. And that's why, I would get mad about it. So then I just started saying, okay, Lord, I will trust you in this, and I will do what you say as I read the scriptures, because I hadn't even really read the Bible before being a Christian. And as I ran into things, I'm like, okay, I'll do this. And, you get to Proverbs 31, she opens her mouth in wisdom, and the speaking of kindness is on her tongue. It's like, well, okay, I need to curb this contentious mouth of mine and say kind things. And then, in Proverbs 21:1, it says the king's heart is like channels of water in the hand of the Lord. He turns it wherever he wishes. So when you know that, and you say, okay, the king, well, that's like someone you're with, your authority, your covering. I'm like, that's my husband. So if I can trust God, I can trust my husband, because God's going to direct his heart, because that's what scripture tells me. So I know that I can trust the Lord in trusting my husband. And today I'll say, how godly a woman is by how she treats her husband. Because a woman who doesn't trust her husband, it speaks volumes. It just speaks volumes. Like I recently listened to an old sermon by what's his name, Bob Russell. He was a senior pastor at a mega church in Kentucky, and they would have 23,000 a weekend. And he was teaching on submission, and he said that he had about 20 elders that he was submissive to, that he was subject to. He came under 20 elders. He said, what if I went around this church and I said, I'm not listening to those guys. I do whatever I want. I'm not going to listen to those guys. How would you feel about me? And then he said, and it's the same with a wife. If you have a wife saying, oh, I'm not listening to him, I'm not going to do what he says, I'm not going to, do what he wants me to do. I mean, not that we have to like follow everything our husbands say or anything like that. I mean, obviously we're whole people. We get to make our own decisions, but the whole concept of I don't care what he says, I'm not going to, listen to him. How does that look as for a wife? And so the way a wife treats her husband, right away how godly a woman is based on that.
Well, and so over the years, you didn't just dive into writing. You spent quite a lot of time serving in church, raising your family, working on, you and your husband worked on your marriage, worked on your things, developed kind of a life plan. And then as your husband went into the becoming a pastor, and then you spending a lot of time volunteering at church, you had some stories to tell. You'd heard a lot of things and you'd done a lot of things, right?
Yes.
And your big dream was what?
I wanted to write. I didn't think that it was ever possible, but I spent my raising my kids years, raising children years, focusing on my children and my family and doing ministry. And I was very careful not to let ministry come before my kids. Like if I had to be somewhere, I made sure my kids were taken care of. There was one time I was serving in a VBS, and I was in a room, and I got my room covered so that I could go pick up my littles, because my son was in kindergarten. And if you didn't get there when you were supposed to, he would kind of get upset and look for me. So I went to pick him up, and I came back to the room, and the lady who was in charge of the whole thing pulled me aside and said, "Where did you do? Why'd you go get your son?" And I said, "Well, I need to. He's my responsibility." And she said, "No, you don't put your kids in front of ministry." And I said, "Well, I'm really sorry. If I can't go get my son when I need to, then I'm not going to be able to serve in this capacity during this week." And then she said, "I always put ministry above my kids. That's just part of doing ministry." And I said, "Well,
Wow.
I'm sorry, I cannot do that." And so she agreed to let me go get my son, but it was hard. She was older, and she was running the show, and I was very intimidated, but I'm like, I'm not going to do ministry at the expense of my children. Well, years later, I found out that she and her husband had split up because she had engaged in an affair. And I'm like, wow, that's so sad. When we don't keep order in our families and in what God has given us to take care of, the other things will fall apart too. And so I learned that lesson early, that my kids mattered, and I wasn't going to sacrifice them on the ministry altar.
Yeah. But your daughter encouraged you when your kids were older and you realized you had the empty nest was looming and you had a little more time. What did your
Mhm.
daughter do?
Well, we were taking a walk one day, and she's like, "Mom, we're like raised. We're on our way out. This is your time. This is your time. What do you want to do?" I said, "I just want to spend time with my kids." She's like, "No, Mom, do something that you really want to do." And I'm like, "Well, I'm not really sure." And she said, "I think you should write a book." I'm like, "Really?" She's like, "Yeah, I really think you should write a book. I think you should write a book about raising me, because you always said I was your toughest. And then I'll write at the end of each chapter my perspective from what you write." And at first I didn't think it was a good idea, but then when I thought about it, I'm like, wow, yeah, that's a good idea. And that's where The Impossible Kid came from, one of my books. And so it was my daughter who just really encouraged me to write. And then I did.
Well, I love that even though that was your first idea, that wasn't your first book published, but that it did come around, that The Impossible Kid did come around. But this was your first one, right?
Correct. Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
well, let's talk about this one because I love your wisdom. In fact, I mean, like I said, I'm giving it to a family member this weekend. So I found a lot of value and wisdom in it. Let's talk about this. You talk about forgiveness and about how your spouse has the power to hurt you because you love them and you give them that power. Talk about
Mm-hmm.
some of the things that you have in here.
Yeah. When we love someone so, so dearly, our ability to be wounded by them, it just goes up. It just does. So when you're married, probably your spouse is going to be the one that hurts you sometimes, or a lot of times, depending, because our feelings get hurt. And so that just happens in marriage, and you need to be able to work through those things and understand that they're for you. They're not trying to hurt you. It's just the way things happen. Like one time I was feeling kind of insecure, and I said to my husband, "Do you love me?" And he goes, "I come home, don't I?" I'm like, oh, like that hurt. I didn't say anything. I was like, oh, like I just kind of that was it. And I didn't say anything for a couple of weeks, but I was really wounded. And I'm like, wow, I need to go back and talk to him about this, because that was a low blow. That was just, why did he say that? And so I'm like, honey, you said you come home when I asked you if you loved me. And I said, of course you come home. Your dog is here. Your garage is here. Of course you're going to come home. And I said, that kind of hurt my feelings. And he said, honey, you don't understand. I always want to come home to you. He goes, there's so many things that I could be doing every day when I get off work, but I don't want to do any of those things. I don't want to go out with the guys. I don't want to go play tennis or whatever. I want to come home to you at the end of the day. And I was like, oh, that was a compliment. And sometimes we could get hurt from compliments when they were trying to say something kind, and we take it in the wrong way. At least I did that day.
Well, communication is one of those things that
Mhm.
everyone needs to work on. And how about the part about what does it mean that becoming from me to we? How does that play out?
Well, when we get married, we generally enter marriage with a lot of baggage. We're carrying around our baggage, and then we finally meet someone and we're like, oh, it's going to be so beautiful. But what happens is his baggage, your baggage, it ends up in a big heap. And what affects him affects you. And what affects you affects him. And we have this thinking before we get married, me, and I need this, and me. And we need to exchange that thinking for we thinking, because now there's somebody else who's affected by you. And so the principles that we learn in our Bibles, like if we're not following those, and if we're having struggles, it's going to come out. Whatever is those things that are buried deep, and those things inside that you struggle with, that's going to come out in marriage, and your spouse is going to get a front row seat. So it's like, if you really want to work on yourself, get married, because all of those rough edges, they are going to come out in marriage. And you have to work on you so that you could be a better we. So it's just the concept of, you're a we now, and you need to remember that. You need to remember you have a spouse that is in a relationship with you now.
Well, and throughout the book, it's peppered by some examples, and you, of course, keep confidentiality with changing names and things like that. But they're really interesting examples where people can see themselves, where couples have done things well or maybe not so well. Where did you come up with all these examples? They make it fun to read.
When I was writing that book, I was going to a mega church in California. My husband was one of the pastors, and I worked with a lot of ladies. People would come up and ask for advice on marriage or family or whatever, and people would just tell me stories. I even had, when they found out I was writing a book about marriage, people like, hey, I got a story for you. Come here, let me tell you this. I'm like, oh, okay. So I go, oh, wow, that's amazing story. I'm going to put that in the book. That's fantastic. Like, there's one couple on their wedding night, they went back to their room, and he turned on the jets in like the jacuzzi thing in their room, and it went all over her and just splattered her with the water. And they just laughed at it instead of getting upset. Things got steamy, and then the water hit her. So funny. I mean, stuff like that happens. And I just remember that story. That just cracked me up. She was so happy to tell me. She says, you got to put that in your book.
That was so cute. And you do devote there. You have that, one of your chapters is helping Christian couples that maybe have a lot of expectations about their wedding night, navigate that maybe things aren't going to go exactly the way they think they will. Maybe those jets hit you in the face. Maybe there's some anxiety or things, and you put it very, you use some really nice humor there, but you do get the point across. And you said something about, like, who else can they ask, right?
Yes, couples, if you're a couple that grew up in the church, then what you hear is, no, don't do that, stay pure, all of that. And then one day, in the matter of a minute, you're a husband and wife, and then it's go. So you go from no to go, like, all of a sudden, and then there's these huge expectations for that night or that afternoon, or like some couples say, well, let's wait till the morning. Like, I've heard all kinds of stories, and there can be so much pressure. But if you think about it, these are two people that have never done that before. I mean, if you waited till your wedding night, this is a first time thing, and there's no way you can know each other right off the bat. And sometimes it just doesn't go as what you created in your mind. So if you, instead of having huge expectations for what's going to happen, and just say, we're just going to enjoy each other, we're just going to be together and enjoy each other and learn each other. And it's going to take us years to learn each other. But that's okay. So it's almost like a test drive the first time.
Yeah. But to kind of get them in that mindset, I think that eases, there was kind of a sad story in there about a poor little girl that was so scared she like locked herself in the bathroom. Bless her heart. And to avoid those things and moving on. And then, of course, moving on to chapter 10, the next one, talking about continuing to keep things going in the bedroom department as someone moves into marriage, that's important too.
Yes, absolutely. And, fun in marriage leads to fun in all aspects of marriage. And as couples, we need to be careful to do that. I remember my husband and I were in a season of raising kids. And it was all about, you do this, you do that. We pick up this time, dinner's at this time. Oh, Tim's got boxing. I'm taking him. I'll, meet you at the coffee shop over there. And it's just, all that arranging. And I remember we were at a church function, and this couple, she came later than him. And when she got there, they were laughing and saying jokes, and they gave each other a high five. And I'm like, wait, I'm watching this couple with these envy eyes. I'm like, she was late and he left without her. And she showed up, and they weren't arguing about that. Most couples, hey, I'm going without you, you're late. No, they just accepted that she was late and it was fine. And I watched them, and they were just having fun together. And I'm like, wow, that is missing in my marriage right now. We're not having fun. And so I went back to my husband, and I'm like, I was watching this couple with envy because they're high-fiving and all this. I said, we need to have fun too. And he completely agreed. And, some couples, fun just happens naturally. And praise God for you couples. That's fantastic. Some couples, like me and my husband, you got to be strategic about having fun and planning it. And it sounds funny to plan fun, but you really need to, especially when you're in those raising kids years. You have a lot of serious stuff going on, or, my husband and I are very heavily involved in ministry. So sometimes you forget to have fun. So important. And then fun in that area fun, and it will lead to fun in the bedroom because you're having fun together, and it just is a natural progression. But the bedroom needs to be the funnest room in the house for sure.
Well, and that's a great segue to your second book, the Straight Talk About Sex and Pancakes, which I just love that. I thought that was so cute. I mean, we talk about the pancakes being the fun part too, but that leads. And tell us about your premise, because it starts in your From Me to We. You introduce it, but then you really unpack it in the Straight Talk About Sex and Pancakes.
Yeah, that book was just such a fun book, and it's really humorful, which is really fun. But one of the things that I heard commonly from women was, it just gets boring. It's the same old thing. And, there's two people there. So if you need to change it up, then you change it up. And sometimes you just got to do something that's just out of the blue. So there was one time I was out shopping, and I saw these silk sheets. They're purple silk sheets. I'm like, oh, I'm going to buy these, and I'm going to put them on the bed. This is going to be amazing. So I put the sheets on the bed. And it was so funny because my husband and I got into bed that night, and our pillows are sliding off like missiles, and we're sliding all over the place, and we were just laughing. So, I mean, it wasn't what I kind of had in mind, but it was so much fun. And that's the thing. Sometimes you just got to change it up and do something different so that it, brings spark again.
Well, and one of the things that you do mention in your book that I think is so important is sometimes people have roadblocks in that area because they've had trauma or abuse in the past, and you are a big proponent of getting help, whether it's for that or whether it's some other sort of, psychological anything. Let's talk a little bit about that, because that's a very real issue that, everything's all fun and games and pancakes, but there are some real serious things too.
There can be major roadblocks, and sometimes you don't know how it's going to affect you, like a person who has sexual abuse in their past, and then now they're in this marriage and things are coming up they didn't realize, or they have anxiety that comes up, or depression, or whatever, that'll hinder your marriage. And so if you are struggling with mental health, that's gonna affect your marriage. And getting help for you is helping your marriage. It's helping your family. It's helping your children. And it's okay if there's something in your past that is really blocking you from having that relationship that you really want to have in marriage. There's nothing wrong with going and getting help. Just like going to the doctor, we need to get the help that we need, because the Bible says, love the Lord God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. And then it says, love your neighbor as yourself. In order to love yourself, you got to love your neighbor like yourself. You need to love yourself, and getting help for yourself is loving your neighbor. And who's our closest neighbor? Our spouse.
Well, and part of that loving yourself is another thing you mentioned. Especially as we age, we can look in the mirror and, we don't look like the star selling, on the soft drink commercial anymore.
Right. It's true.
we tend to focus more on those things than our husband does.
That's true. And we women, and even when before we start aging, sometimes we're looking in the mirror and we're going, "Ooh, I don't like that, and I don't like that, and look at this, and oh, what if does he see this?" Or and men, they're not looking at those things. They don't see us the way we see that, the way that we don't see ourselves the way they see us and the way they look at us. And they're looking at us in a way that they're pleased. I mean, they're just happy that you're there. And if you let those things hinder your relationship with him, then it's really sad because he's not looking at those things that we see. They don't even notice them.
So maybe that's something that we women can really think about, that a way to love our husbands well is to
Mhm.
take those thoughts captive and give them to God and know that that's not where we need to dwell. So we
Mhm.
can get back to pancakes.
Exactly. Because I mean, it's not really going to get better as you age. I mean, the more you age, the more you're like, oh, that's starting to droop, and this is happening. I mean, we could do our best by working out and all that, but if I mean, it just we're all going to be wrinkled at some point. It's just the way it is.
Oh, Lucille, you were so much fun. Thank you so much for being here. It's just a delight talking with you.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Oh, and Marriage Champions, I know you're going to want to find out more about Lucille and her resources, and you can always reach us at marriageinitiative.org.